and Governance Committee. It is, I think, I can't see the clock because of the reflection, but I think it's 7 o'clock. I hear the church bells chiming, so we'll take it, it is 7 o'clock. Just before we start, the usual statement needs to be read out. This is a public meeting and members of the public and press are permitted to report on the proceedings. Reporting includes filming, photographing, making an audio recording and providing commentary on proceedings. Please note this meeting is recorded and streamed live. These recordings are published on the relevant meeting page of the Council's website. By choosing to attend this public meeting, you are deemed to have given your consent to being filmed or recorded and for any footage to be broadcast or published. If the alarm sounds, the premises must be evacuated immediately. Do not spend time collecting personal belongings. All emergency escape routes are clearly signed. Once you have left the building, the assembly point is in the High Street opposite the Guildhall. Members and other speakers are reminded, please, to use their microphone when speaking. And that takes us on to item 1, appointment of substitutes. Margaret.
There are none, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Item 2, declarations of interest. Does any member have any interest to declare? We move on to item 3, public participation. Margaret.
There is none, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Item 4, minutes. Can I please sign these as a correct record? Is that agreed? Just show of hands. Thank you. That item 5 is the next big item. External audit progress 21-22 to 23-24. And Mr. Baldwin will be introducing this, and then we'll have questions and discussion after that. So over to you, Mr. Baldwin, please.
Thank you, Chair. This short report is to update the committee on the latest position in terms of the annual accounts and the external audit. As we've discussed in previous meetings, we are somewhere behind where we would normally expect to be, mainly as a result of the external auditors not having the resource available to conduct the audits. Paragraph 3 starts off with the 21-22 accounts. The draft accounts are available on the Council's website, and I had a conversation with the auditors only 3 or 4 weeks ago where they were confirming that they were ready to start the audit and would be contacting me shortly to give me the start date. Well, 3 or 4 weeks have passed and I haven't heard any more, so I'm still waiting. Once that does start, we will be doing the work remotely, as we did during the pandemic. That proved quite a successful way of working, and we will continue to do that, helped by the fact that the Council's records are all now paperless. Everything is held virtually, so it becomes very easy to transfer information to them. In terms of the 22-23 audit, obviously, given that we haven't yet started 21-22, they haven't advised us in any way when they think they're going to do 22-23. But I would hope that that will be completed before we get to the end of the year, and we can follow up on that when we have the meeting of this committee in March 2024. The reason why it needs to be completed by then is that thereafter, the new audit firm, Assets, will have started, having been appointed by the audit appointment body, and they will be responsible for the audit of the current year, 23-24. We've already made contact with them and some introductory conversations, and they've sent us their initial questionnaire in terms of our controls and procedures and so on. And they're keen to start planning, which we expect them to come and do that with us. Again, I would think virtually, but post-Christmas, probably January, February time. It goes without saying that we're then coming up against a bit of a bottleneck. We're now in the middle of September. We've got 2 audits to complete, ideally before Christmas, which is a tall order to say the least. And then straight after Christmas, we'll be starting the planning for the current year with the new auditors. There's a lot of ground to cover in a short space of time. We will see how that pans out, but it really is out of our control. We're in the hands of the, as I say, Ernst Young, the current auditors. The only other factor in this that may influence things. I haven't referred to this in the report, but you may have read in the press that the government are looking at a review nationally of the audit backlog and considering steps they may take to reduce that. There is a precedent for this. In previous years, they've curtailed the audits of years that were well behind to allow things to catch up. Whether they'll decide to do that again remains to be seen, but it's certainly a possibility. Appendix 1, for those of you who've looked at it, is 100 pages long, I'm afraid, and is the draft accounts for 21-22. As I say, those are on the website, so they're available for public viewing. They are before audit, but happy to take any questions on those if you have anything that wants clarification. I think that's all I have to say, Chair. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Baldwin. Thank you very much. Do members have any questions or comments to Mr. Baldwin? Councillor Lamb.
Thank you very much. It's a question on page 124 under grants, including members' grants, Homes for Ukraine. I take it these are the so-called sort of COVID recovery grants that have been given for members to spend. Is that what these are? Is that correct? Is that the...
124, yeah, I was
just at the top, relatively at the start of the report. Is this table here? Is it the covering report, is it? Oh, it's the internal one. Oh, I've got ahead of myself. Ah, sorry. I got ahead.
This is a short report. It only goes up to page 118.
Okay, I do have a question on that.
I think you're ahead of your time.
I'm ahead of myself.
Don't worry, Councillor, and we'll come on to that. Just one thing at a time. So anything on the first 118 pages, I could narrow it down a bit.
Okay, I have got a question on that as well then. That's
okay,
fine, that's fine.
Fire away, Councillor
Right,
Lamb.
Firstly, there's a correction on page 5. From May 2024, elections will be held every 4 years, not every 5 years, surely. Okay. The next question is on page 70. And this is about local government pension scheme and unfunded benefits assumptions. Now, what was really interesting here on this table, and correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm understanding this correct, it's saying that longevity at the age of 65 for current pensioners male is 22.6. Am I assuming that our assumptions are based on the idea that someone at the age of 65 is going to live for a further 22 years? Is that what that means? And therefore that has consequences for the pension sort of liabilities of the council. Is that what that means? Because it says longevity at 65 for current pensioners male, 22.6. Is that what that means? Or have I horribly misunderstood that?
That is a correct interpretation, and that assumption is provided by the pension actuaries. That's not something that we have come up with ourselves.
But what's really interesting about this is, even on my relatively limited maths, you're assuming that the average pensioner is going to live to the age of, male pensioner is going to live to the age of 87, whereas the average life expectancy in this country is for a male is only 79. So aren't we massively overestimating how long we will be liable to pay out pensions? I don't quite understand the differences, because on my maths, it looks like we're assuming that the average male is going to live to 87, whereas the national figure is actually 79, and the average female is going to live to 90, whereas the national figure is 83. I'm just wondering why those figures are so out of kilter with the national mortality rates. Why is it so different?
As I say, the assumptions provided by the pension actuaries, who are the experts in the field, and
I just wonder whether they were assuming that people who work
for
Worcester City Council somehow are going to live a lot longer than the average citizen, which makes working here very good for your health, I assume.
Well, we can but hope, Councillor Lamb. Ms Stroud? Oh, Mr. Flint.
Through you, Chair, because these are figures which are provided to us by the actuaries, they are based on the actuaries' own measures. So they might not be in years, for example. We don't actually know what those figures represent, but they may also be to do with the fact that people are leaving the pension fund earlier, which are taking into account those kind of factors. So we could get an these are figures which are provided to us by the actuaries using their own assumptions and calculations and methodologies which they prepare. The purpose of the table is to simply show how those have changed over time. So they've changed from one year to the next. And their assumptions have suggested that longevity has fallen slightly from 21-22. And that's just what's feeding into our assessment of how the pension fund should work. So we can't essentially answer the question for you, Matt, but we can ask the actuaries and see if we can find out what that means.
I genuinely would be interested, because later on in the report it does come up, you know, under this table where it's got assumptions made about the future and other major sources of estimation uncertainty. The first uncertainty is about the estimation of the net liability to pay pensions. And one of the things it talks about again is retirement age, mortality rates and expected returns. Because surely, you know, we're overestimating how much we might have to pay out as a council because we're overestimating how long people will live. That's what it seems to be suggesting.
Through you, Chair, the difficulty we're having is that we don't know if that's what it's saying. I mean, that's the statement of what the longevity at 65 is something which the actuaries themselves will need to explain what that figures represent. The purpose of the table is to show it's changing over time. And there is actually there is a dialogue with the actuaries through the process of the triennial review. So when we meet with them every 3 years to talk through those assumptions, they then give us an explanation as to why they've chosen those, and those are benchmarked against other actuaries' assumptions. So there is that question. Well, you know, are you over assuming things here or under assuming? So we get some assurance that they're in the right ballpark. But exactly what those figures represent, they are metrics designed to show the progress over time, rather than to give us information about the kind of questions which you're answering, which we could look into in more detail.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn. Well, I think given the interest in this and possible implications, perhaps the committee could have a short report to the next meeting. Yeah. Find out what information you can, and then we can have a debate about that. But Councillor, I thought actually male life expectancy was higher than 79. There's no point in just banding figures around it. But let's find out what we can, come back to a future meeting, and we can discuss it further on the basis of the information we've got. Is that happy with the committee? Thank you. Any other questions on this? In that case, we're asked, the recommendation is that we note the external auditor's progress and plans, and that we note the appointment of the new auditor to commence with the audit for 23-24. Couldn't come sooner, I think is a bit I would add on. Is that agreed? We'll note the report. Thank you very much. That takes us on then to item 6, the Internal Audit Progress Report 23-24. Mr. Bromwich, over to you, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this report will be familiar to most members of the committee. It's our progress report. It was written at the end of August 2023, and it informs members of the continuing progress in regards to 23-24 plan, and also brings to your attention any potential risks or exceptions worth noting. In this particular report, I've also picked up a couple of residual reviews from 22-23 for your information as well. So if we start with 22-23 reviews, you'll see that there were 3 reviews finalised, and those are reported. We've got several others that are nearing completion, just essentially awaiting final sign-off. So again, those will be filtering their way through to you to give you some assurance in regards to the areas that were reviewed in regards to those. 23-24, you'll note that we've got work undertaken on 7 areas at the moment. So 3 are almost complete, and 4 rolling reviews are continuing. The rolling reviews are potentially core financials, and they run through from Q1 to Q3 inclusive, and are then reported on in Q4. So those particular reviews, creditors, debtors, payroll, will be continuing behind the scenes, and we'll report to you after Christmas. National Fraud Initiative, the NFI, the results from last year's uploads continue to be worked on by the relevant services. So they're investigating those matches for any potential fraud and reporting back accordingly to NFI. We, as internal audit, play an advisory come coordinating role in regards to NFI, and there will be further updates and uploads required at the end of this particular year, calendar year, as NFI require more data in order to match. Follow-ups have continued, and in regards to those, we report by exception, and I've got no exceptions to report before you this evening in regards to the work that has taken place in the past. Risk management, that continues to be monitored and logged through Pentana and regularly reported to P&R, so Policy and Resource Committee, and that is set to continue going forwards, so that there is an overview of the risk management process within the organisation as a whole. The appendices, starting at page 122 in your bundle tonight, appendices 1 and 2 provide some metrics and an overview of progress. There's a summary of days used against the budgeted days, so that gives you an indication as to what's been used so far. And there's a full oversight of the 23-24 plan and the ongoing progress to date regarding that particular plan. So you've got oversight of the whole plan, whether we've actually started and commenced work on certain areas, or we're due to commence work in the coming quarters. So by providing that to you, it gives you a more holistic view of what's taking place for internal audit over the 12 months. Jumping ahead to Appendix 4, page 128 of your bundle, that provides copies of the finalised reports. You will note that there is one high priority recommendation, and there are several medium priority recommendations spread over several reports. I think the key message here and the assurance to be given before members this evening is the fact that all of the recommendations have been acknowledged, they've been accepted, and there is a clear management plan in place in order to deal with any potential risks that those particular findings may have identified. So we will pick the implementation up of those particular findings and recommendations through our routine follow-up process, and obviously report back any exceptions, should there be any, to future meetings. Chair, that's probably a good place to stop and ask for any questions, and I'm sure Councillor Lamb has got a question.
Thank you, Mr. Bromwich. As always, a very clear and concise report. Thank you very much. Yeah, Councillor Lamb, I think, what's definitely first, and then Councillor Cookson.
Just press.
There we go. Okay. Yeah. So page 124 on the report. I'm assuming the grants here referred to, which says including members' grants, are the so-called COVID recovery grants that have been allocated in the last couple of years. I suppose the question is that from my experience, these grants have been interpreted, and the sort of criteria used to award these grants has been set very, very broad. You know, it's almost like it is called COVID recovery money, and yet members, from my experience, have been able to sort of allocate this to all kinds of things with very few kind of specific criteria attached to it. Therefore, how do you manage to audit something where, to be honest with you, there is no real kind of rules or criteria set against it? I mean, I personally think these members' grants are something that should carry on after this year, and as they are at the county council, and obviously I'll be putting that argument forward when it comes to the budget setting process. But at the moment, and to be honest with you, I mean, members, you know, we're all democratically elected politicians, we're accountable to the people, and therefore we should be given a certain amount of freedom to allocate money within reason to our local communities. But from an auditing perspective, how do we ensure that these COVID recovery grants are not being spent incorrectly?
Mr. Bromwich?
Through you, Chair. Yes, it's a very good point that's been made in regards to the grants that we're looking at here. These are the grants that members are, to all intents and purposes, able to provide within their wards, and it is the amount that is provided to members for them to use as they think fit throughout the year. As far as criteria is concerned, it's really a question of ensuring that there's due diligence being applied, and that is shown in regards to how the process is followed with the allocation of that money. As far as COVID is concerned, and the grants that came through in regards to COVID, yes, there was a fairly broad spec associated with those, but there were certain terms and conditions that and applications that were required from those requesting those sort of grants some time ago, and those have undergone various scrutinies over the past 12-18 months in regards to any potential fraudulent activity in connection with those grants that were issued. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Bromwich. Does Councillor Lamb want to follow that up? No. Thank you. Councillor Cookson?
Mine were more observations than anything else. First of all, I wanted to say, as somebody relatively new to audit, I've not been involved in this before, and I've not had the opportunity to read it, and I did find this particularly interesting and very reassuring, the level of robustness that was in these. And it was nice that you said that they've been accepted by managers, because I hadn't expected the level of robustness, and I was very impressed by that. However, there was one thing that I would have a concern about, and it did get picked up, because I read on page 161 where it said about, in the planning section, about removing checks, and I quite see why you'll be looking at removing them, but there was alarm bells going on about equal opportunities, and then I turned the page, and it mentions the need to do an equality impact assessment on that. And I suppose it's just an observation, while I quite see why we need to move away from cheque payments as much as possible, and I do value the fact that it says we're looking at enhancing the council's online payment system, I would be concerned if as a council we move away from cheques altogether, or we try, and I know that isn't a suggestion here, but I just wanted to make that observation, because I do think there is still a segment of society where cheques is the way that they can actually interact and pay their bills and be involved in things, and I don't think we're at the stage yet where we can move away from that. So it's more of an observation rather than a question.
Well, thank you, Councillor Cookson. It won't do you any good, but I totally agree with you, because this was the very question I raised at the briefing about an hour ago, that we should retain various options as to how people pay for their services. And my view was that we should retain cheques as a method if people so choose to pay by that method. So thank you for your comment. It was taken up before, and I think Mr. Bromwich can give you some reassurance. This will be a policy decision. Members will have to take the decision if they want to abolish the use of cheques. I hope we never reach that stage.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I don't think there's much more to say than that. It's not something that would be undertaken lightly. There would be clear debate on it, and it would come before members should there be a corporate requirement for the removal of cheques, but there is no appetite for that at the moment, and there are a number of different ways which remain available to our residents in order for them to pay, whether it be through cheque, cash, direct debit, etc., card, and depending on the service they want, they have various ways in order to pay for that service. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. It's nice to see we've got cross-party support in favour of different ways to pay.
Well, it's nice that you're allying yourself with me, but I say it won't do you any good. See where it takes us. Do members have any questions or other questions or comments on this report? Councillor Potowski.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much for this report, Mark. I'm sorry, Andy. Just a couple of questions. So first of all, an observation before I ask my question. So I was really pleased to see the action taken based on the risk identified around the data protection. So all the training completed, the dashboard created. I think it's a very serious matter brought to light by data leaks in the major police forces across the country. So that's really pleasing to see. My question has to do with, well, there's two questions. So there is a reference to consultancy services in the report, and I've raised this with the chair of the committee before the meeting today. Do we have a way of auditing the value for money and the effectiveness of the consultancy services that this council commissions? Are we getting a return for money when we ask consultants to come in and do a work for us? Because as I said, based on the reading prior to this meeting, I can't really identify, apart from the terms and conditions or contractual agreements, I can't see anything specifically on the use of consultancy. So in terms of, I'm not going to mention the specific projects, but I think it would be something valuable when we go out to the consultants, ask them to provide commission work, which is worth lots and lots of money, tens of thousands of pounds, to have assurance that they provided what we asked for, and it's basically good value for money. I've got another question, but should I leave it until?
Yeah, if you're doing one at a time, Councillor Trotsky, yes.
Great,
Councillor Bromwich, you'd like to respond, please?
Thank you, Chair. Through you. Yes, there's nothing specific in the internal audit plan for this year to look specifically at consultancy services, but it's potentially an area that could be suggested by committee or chair for next year. As far as consultancy goes, it would be a question of contract management, insofar as are they delivering what they have agreed to deliver, and how is that being managed and monitored, that they are in fact delivering what they've agreed to deliver. So there are a number of aspects that play into how and whether we're as an authority obtaining value for money through the consultancy services. There's obviously a clear procurement process in place for those type of services, and there should be a very clear specification laid down in that process in order to obtain their services in the first place. So there are a number of areas that could be referenced in order to audit from an internal audit perspective. But on a day-to-day basis, it would be through the normal delivery of the service that they're providing, as to whether they're delivering against the agreed specification.
Follow that up.
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you, Andy, for this. I think I'd like to, if that's okay with you, Chair, I'd like to have it minuted in the sense that I suggest there's a value in looking into how we commission consultancy services and what kind of return for money we receive. As I said, I'm not going to mention specific projects here, but I think it would be in public interest and probably an exercise in, commonsensical approach to the audit process.
Thank you, Councillor Trotsky. In fact, I think we can take it a bit further. Outbreak of cross-party agreement here. This is something I have raised in the past about how we monitor consultants. We employ a lot of consultants. In my opinion, they're very well paid. They always seem to be at the top end of the range. And I think we should have that information. So I think, Mr. Bromwich, in answer to your oblique suggestion just now, I think it would be a good idea to have a report on that and to look at that, because I think the amount of money involved is large, and we should be able, you should be able to assure us the answer to that question that has been asked is yes, that we're getting value for money, because, I mean, why not? I mean, a contractor is responsible for the actions of their subcontractors, so I would take the similar view that we should know what the consultants are doing, just because we don't employ them directly, we want value for money because we're giving them a lot of money for the services that they provide us.
Through you, Chair, I don't disagree with that. And we as internal audit, be more than happy to do a piece of work on that. We have done in the past similar pieces of work. What I would say is it's something that we can include for next year's plan. And then we can put an actual budget against it, whereas this year we're sort of struggling for resource at the moment. So in order to do it justice, I would suggest that it goes into the 24-25 plan, which will be coming before committee, all being well, around about March time next year. And it will actually show in the plan as a specific piece of work, so that we can give it the time it deserves.
Thank you. Do the committee agree with that? I would certainly support that. Obviously, it'll come to committee in March, but I think we're unanimous that we would like that anyway. And Councillor Cookson.
To add to that, I'm assuming that internal audit isn't the only way that we can obtain that sort of information. So you talked about how it's actually monitored by whoever is responsible for contract management. It shows my ignorance of the city council structures. I don't know who in the teams are actually responsible for contract management, but presumably you have officers responsible for that. So actually they could send us an interim report to a future committee that just tells us more about the process that they go through on a regular daily process, a business as usual process to manage those contracts, to make sure we are getting value for money.
Mr. Flynn.
Through you, Chair. The difficulties which would start to emerge quite quickly are multiple in terms of, first of all, what is a consultant? What sorts of contracts would come within the remit of the scope of the work? Over what time periods, what values are we interested in, and what sort of measures might be applied in terms of value for money? So I think routing it through the audit approach would enable us to develop a methodology for it, because it's not a straightforward thing, is it, to assess value for money anyway, but in particular something as sort of wide in its scope as the term consultant, because it could mean a huge range of things. There is the procurement side of that, and we have very detailed procurement processes which we can analyse and assess quite simply, because it's quite objective. Have we fulfilled the criteria in terms of the procurement process? So that end of it is quite straightforward. In terms of assessing the actual value for money of what's been delivered, that's a much more complex process to come up with some kind of assessment methodology and to determine what sample we might use. So if you agree, Chair, I think that probably the best approach is to work it through the audit rather than trying to come up with a separate assessment on individual cases. I mean, we could spot check particular things if there was particular interest in any specific area, then that's something that we could do. And we have done that in the past on activities where we felt that we haven't achieved value for money. And the committee has requested a specific assessment of that, so we can do it in particular cases. But as far as a general assessment of how we manage contractors and consultants, then I think that the approach that Andy outlined in terms of building it into the audit plan is probably the one that would be most effective in terms of getting us to a proper assessment and a conclusion that we can bring to you that we're all happy with.
Ms. Stroud.
And just to follow up on the point about sort of contract management approach within the council, we are a very small council in terms of our workforce, and therefore in the majority of cases the contract management function sits with the council officer who has been authorised to let the contract, as opposed to in a larger organisation where you may have a contract management function which sits slightly at arm's length from the original commissioner. In our organisation, as I say, with one or two exceptions, for example, the Freedom Leisure contract, where somebody is designated as the contract manager, there's contract management in all sorts of roles above certain pay grades in the council. Necessarily, it's fitting into people's existing portfolios. So that is just an example of why it would be difficult to sort of extract a layer, because it sits within multiple portfolios.
Councillor Cookson.
So I can quite understand why it sits in multiple portfolios, but it's quite a technical role. So do staff get support to be able to do that, to actually be able to fulfil that specific function of their role?
Only to a limited degree, Councillor Cookson.
So it might be something that we might want to be looking at training and support for that, because it is a very technical function. And if they're going to be held responsible for how well they hold consultants responsible, we want to make sure that the staff are confident in doing that.
Ms Stroud?
Absolutely, thank you. And I could certainly anticipate that a finding from any audit might be a recommendation that training would be beneficial. So I can understand why would you suggest that? I couldn't disagree. I mean, we routinely train in procurement processes, but the sort of lived experience of managing a difficult contractual situation is something different, isn't it? So yes, I'm happy to accept that there may be a training recommendation. To be specific about what that would be again probably good to wait for the audit process. I can reassure you that those staff, I can reassure you, A, that we have very strict procurement rules with a lot of gateways within them, and B, those staff who are authorised to be part of the procurement process must undertake training before they do. But in terms of the sort of more complex dynamics of contract management, we don't offer a bespoke course, as I know some larger authorities do.
Thank you. Are you happy with that? I think, members, what I would suggest then is we do accept Mr Bromwich's proposal and we take it through the audit process for 24-25, and then we'll have all the procedures in place. And of course, if anything comes out of that, then it's up to the committee to ask for more information or look at something specifically. Councillor Jagger.
Just wanted to add a point. I support everybody's comments, and I do think that I can understand the layers that would come in assessing the value for money. Perhaps one option is in the presentation. If the information is presented in a way that a layperson could understand it very simply, where the money goes and how, in a way that we can easily explain it in the doorstep, because unfortunately we will have to explain it. And one of the disadvantages of very detailed reports is that they often have jargon that is not always accessible, that is difficult to explain or break down. And so it may not necessarily be about explaining value for money, but simply explaining just like the law needs to be explained to a magistrate or a jury in a simple layman's terms, that might be enough in many situations.
Thank you. That's a point well made, as Mr Bromwich knows. Plain English, so that members can understand the report, then we can better discuss them. But he's well aware of that. And I think, Mr Bromwich, over the years you have made things much simpler and much plainer in English than they were perhaps 10 years ago. So, point well taken.
Yeah, I still slip up with acronyms now and again.
Trotsky?
Yes, indeed, if I may, Chair, thank you. I had another question which is not related to the use of consultancy by the council. It's quite separate, but I think it serves well in terms of asking it in the public interest. So would we be able to provide assurances that what's happening in terms of different councils across the country issuing Section 114 notices, that this council has, and in particular when it comes to the legal challenges based on the equal pay in Birmingham, just up the road, that this council can provide assurance that we are in a good position. So I think it would be good to air it out and hear it in public that we are in a good position when it comes to our systems, indeed the gender pay gap as well, and that there is no likelihood of this kind of situation occurring. Thank you.
Yes, that's a fair question. We don't end up like Birmingham, who does. Ms Stroud or Mr Flynn, do you want to answer that?
Say on that one, if I do the first part, I can assure members that there is no risk in the immediate future of our issuing a Section 114 notice. Full details of that will be provided at the next Policy and Resources Committee and as we go through the budget setting process. So we have been through a lengthy process of ensuring that we are becoming as efficient as possible, maximising our opportunities to reduce costs and increase income such that we have sufficient funds to continue to to function as a council, and we have plenty of reserves as things stand to ensure that if there are shocks to the system which we haven't considered, that we can meet those. So there is no risk on that in that respect. In terms of the pay gender gap and the other issues which have been raised similarly in relation to that, the latest data that we had, which was published in 2019-20, showed that we had I'm not sure the right expression, but the average pay for women in this council is higher than the average pay for men, whether that's a median average or a mean average. And that's to do with the structure of the council and the way that it's set up. But it's there is no issue in respect of equality of pay as far as the equal pay provisions stand. And I think those details are set out in information which is published on our website. So that's on open access as well.
Thank you, Mr. Trim. Mr. Stroud, I'm sure is bursting to come in on that point, I think.
We're just itching, aren't we? I mean, I think I'm grateful for the question. I think it's really appropriate that we ask that question of ourselves quite regularly. I was going to reflect that, Councillor, you mentioned assurance. One of the challenges is the looking back and the time lag between looking back at a previous year and the current situation. So, for example, the annual governance statement, the legislation requires a council to produce an annual governance statement to give assurance about the good governance and financial health of the organisation. But the time that we report it is looking back at the year gone. So it isn't a current snapshot. I mean, I would share my statutory colleagues' view that we are in a safe place as regards equal pay litigation and Section 114 territory and those matters. But I'm interested in I'm thinking about the question and the fact that in terms of reporting to this committee or other places, there's a time lag, isn't there, between the sort of old information, the current information. Yeah. And the situation in Birmingham is that's being reported relates to an undiscovered liability coming to light and the magnitude of that. Equal pay liability is different from gender pay gap. The gender pay gap information should be updated on our website. We're required to publish it every year. I'll make sure that that's the case when I get back in the office tomorrow. Equal pay liability is something that every local authority needs to be vigilant about. But this council has put staff on a robust pay scale and continues to use robust job evaluation processes. And in fact, members of the Personnel General Purposes Committee will have heard that we've refreshed that job evaluation process recently to make sure that we're not deviating from it, and we're satisfied that we're not. So there's always a need for vigilance. I mean, on a workforce the scale of Birmingham, clearly when an issue has arisen, then the multiplier across the size of the workforce has been very significant. So I'm saying those sorts of things because those are the things I could write in an annual governance statement where you'll recall my sections that say there's no litigation or that we've had one claim, but that's about the year gone. So I'm thinking that it might be helpful for our next meeting to provide almost a bit of a narrative, a bit of commentary around some of the sort of things that Max Caller, one of the lead commissioners, has said, who goes and does interventions around the country, and just reflect on that in the context of Worcester and weave that into our sort of governance framework. So it's a bit more of a real-time commentary, if that would be helpful.
Thank you, Mr. Stroud. Councillor Petrosky.
Just very briefly, Chair. Thank you. I think there's an important distinction there between gender pay gap and equal pay, and also the fact that the equal pay litigation goes back in terms of time allowed for those being brought to court is 6 years rather than 6 months when it comes to the employment tribunal. But I think it would be a welcome exercise and something that would provide an extra reassurance from the audit, but also sort of financial liability potentially point of view. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, thank you for that question. I mean, it's I saw many people in Worcester have asked themselves that question: is Worcester safe? I think the message we're getting is yes, but obviously we need to be ever vigilant. Members, thank you for those questions and comments. That brings us to the recommendation that the committee note the report. Do we agree to note the report? I've never understood what not noting it means, but we obviously have noted it. Any other business? We don't normally have any, but Councillor Jagger has had the courtesy to message me just before the meeting with a question, so I'm very happy to take that. If you'd like to phrase it, And I'll ask Mr. I think it's going to be from Ms. Stroud. We're happy to answer that for you.
Just a question has risen within our group about the structure for releasing information for the agendas and the reports in advance so members can have a chance to read them. We do have a number of members who work full-time that might need to do that quickly. There's a lot to learn, particularly if you're newly elected. And there seems to be some inconsistency as to when the reports are available. So I just wanted to know what the procedure is. What's the expectation? Are we expecting to have it 1 week before, 2 weeks before? Is that an expectation across all committees, or is that something that is decided in different committees ad hoc?
Ms. Stroud.
Through you, Chair. Thank you for the question. The expectations set out in the legislation, and the legislation requires us to publish an agenda with 5 clear working days before the meeting. So for every formal committee, every formally constituted committee, the legislation requires us to publish the agenda with 5 clear working days. And the effect of not publishing the agenda with 5 clear working days is it can make the decisions taken by the committee more vulnerable to challenge on the grounds of procedural irregularity. It doesn't mean they're automatically void decisions, it just makes the decisions more vulnerable. So the way that we ensure that happens is through the good offices of democratic services who ensure faithfully on every formal committee, month in, month out, that 5 clear working days rule is respected. For councillors to actually pick that up would depend on their own patterns and habits. So for example, every councillor will have that notification in their emails with that 5 clear working days, the agenda has been published, and that link will reveal the papers. If councillors have chosen to collect a set of papers, then they've had the email as well, but if they collect their papers closer to the meeting than the 5 days, there's not a lot we can do about that. We would struggle to publish any further away than 5 clear working days. So for example, if there was a motion to make that 10 clear working days, officers would struggle to meet that because of the regularity of our committee meetings. And if you take planning committee, for example, one of our most important regulatory committees in terms of papers, compliance, due notice, we would meet ourselves coming back because planning committee meets every month. So we hold the 5 clear working days, an absolute rule. We adhere to it every month without fail, councillor. You have my word for that. And my colleagues in the corner would certainly attest to that. Occasionally there would be a late paper. We would try and avoid that because, again, in terms of the sort of good faith and the transparency, late papers are not well received by members and they're not well received by the public. So we try and avoid late papers. It does occasionally happen, and where there's slippage, I'm always grateful that people, you know, pull us up on that because it's right. Where late papers is more of a normality is supplemental late papers on planning committee, where that is a reality again of the fact that the publication of the papers to planning committee sometimes will require, well not require, but enable somebody who wants to speak at the committee to come forward. So sometimes there's a little bit of a late paper that's relevant, has come in just in time, we've got to publish, and we've just got to put it as a late paper. So I didn't explain that very well, members of planning committee, but it's not the substantive item that's gone late, it's a part of the item. And then I think the only other thing to say is that in relation to some of our not formally constituted committees, we don't necessarily observe the 5 working days rule, but we make sure that they've gone out before the weekend if the meeting is on the Monday, or they've gone out at the start of the week for the end of the week and so forth. I hope that provides some reassurance. If there's anything in particular that doesn't feel like it's working like that, please drop me an email and we'll pick that one up separately. But as I say, the 5 clear working days is happening.
Thank you very much. That answered my question.
Thank you, Councillor Jagger, and also for alerting me in advance. That's very courteous and very helpful. Members, just before we disperse, it's a task. It's sad for me to have to do it, although in a sense I'm glad I'm doing it. Mr. Bromwich, this is his last Audit and Governance meeting. Andy has actually been in audit, I think, for 39 years. He did in fact tell me that he hasn't been on the Audit and Governance Committee for 39 years. And I think it's true to say, Andy, I'm surprised that it was that long. His going up into higher things, actually, county council. So Andy, good luck in your new role. I will probably see you, at least for the next few years, probably rolling around County Hall. A lot of it's fenced off at the moment because it's got this concrete. So I might not see for a while. But Andy, a big thank you from this committee and on behalf of the council as well, because you have been what I would call a gentleman. You've always been courteous, you provided answers, you've done it with good grace and good humour, you've done it professionally, and frankly, I will miss you. I mean, you are part of the furniture as far as I'm concerned with this committee, but I hope you've enjoyed the work, because I think you have made a very, very valuable contribution, not only to this committee, but your work in audit in general. As you know, we meet on the Fire Authority, where you do work there. So sometimes you've had the misfortune to have to put up with me twice a week. But it has been a pleasure to work with you. And when I say you're a gentleman, I mean that is meant as a very clear, strong compliment. I will miss you. I think the committee will miss you. I think perhaps I'm the longest serving member on this committee now, which is frightening. But I've always valued your support, your good humour and your politeness. And I think they're increasingly rare things in life today. So they're so valuable. Hang on to them. And I've no doubt you won't change when you go up to County Hall. Just you'll get a bit more money for it. And good luck to you. Is there anything you'd like to say, Andy? I don't want to embarrass you any further.
I've got not a lot to say really on that, apart from thank you, Chair, for those very kind words. Not expected, and it has been a number of years, and it was a decision that I had to make, and the opportunity came along with the County Council, and it was one that I felt that will offer a new challenge, and looking forward to that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Andy, and good luck. And I will have the pleasure of meeting you again in the future on the odd occasion. Yes. Members, and that brings us to the end of the meeting. Thank you very much for your attendance and your participation.